everyone, Costume Teacher here, and I'm here today to read to you Chapter 8 from Mr. Popper's Penguins, which is called Penguin's Promenade. All right, there are a few vocabulary words in this chapter I want to make sure that we are all familiar with, starting with that fancy word in the name of the chapter. Can everyone say promenade? Promenade means a walk or parade through a public place. Ooh, sounds like he's gonna take Captain Cook on a promenade. Another word that means walk is stroll. Can everyone say stroll? Stroll means to walk, although kind of slowly. Perhaps some of you stroll when you perhaps maybe should walk a little faster. Our next word is graciously. Can everyone say graciously? That means to do something politely. Our next word is investigate. Can everyone say investigate? That means to look around to solve a mystery. And our final word is bystander. Can everyone say bystander? That means someone who is watching something happen. Perhaps you've heard that word when you have been discussing things in guidance lessons. All right, if you are following along with a copy of the book, then we are on page 49. We're going to hit over 50 pages during this chapter. How cool is that? All right, and if you're not following along with a copy, just listen and enjoy. Penguin's Promenade. Mr. Popper soon found that it was not so easy to take a penguin for a stroll. Captain Cook did not care at first for the idea of being put on a leash. However, Mr. Popper was firm. He tied one end of the clothesline to the penguin's fat throat and the other to his own wrist. Oh, so that's what he needed the clothesline for. And his throat isn't fat, it's beautiful. Lay off. Orc! Said Captain Cook indignantly. Still, he was a very reasonable sort of bird, and when he saw that protesting did him no good, he recovered his customary dignity and decided to let Mr. Popper lead him. Mr. Popper put on his best Sunday derby, that means a fancy hat, and opened the front door with Captain Cook waddling graciously beside him. "Gaw!" said the penguin, stopping at the edge of the porch to look down at the steps. Mr. Popper gave him plenty of clothesline leash. "Gook!" said Captain Cook, and raising his flippers, fun flipper here, he leaned forward bravely and tobogganed down the steps on his stomach. Remember, that's when they go and they glide on their tummies. Mr. Popper followed, though not in the same way. Just in case you were wondering if Mr. Popper launched himself down the steps on his tummy, he didn't. Captain Cook quickly got up on his feet again and strutted to the street ahead of Mr. Popper with many quick turns of his head and pleased comments on the new scene. Down Proudfoot Avenue came a neighbor of the Poppers, Mrs. Callahan, with her arms full of groceries. She stared in astonishment when she saw Captain Cook and Mr. Popper, looking like a larger penguin himself in his black tailcoat. "Heavens have mercy on us!" she exclaimed as the bird began to investigate the striped stockings under her house dress. "It isn't an owl, and it isn't a goose." "It isn't," said Mr. Popper, tipping his Sunday derby. "It's an Antarctic penguin, Mrs. Callahan." "Oh, get it away from me," said Mrs. Callahan to Captain Cook. An anteater, is it? Does everyone have a little trouble hearing Mr. Popper? Does he need to talk a little louder? Not anteater, explained Mr. Popper. Antarctic. It was sent to me from the South Pole. Take your South Pole goose away from me at once, said Mrs. Callahan. Mr. Popper pulled obediently at the clothesline, while Captain Cook took a parting peck at Mrs. Callahan's striped stockings. Heavens preserve us, said Mrs. Callahan. I must stop in and see Mrs. Popper at once. I would never have believed it. I will be going now. So will I, said Mr. Popper, as Captain Cook dragged him off down the street. Their next stop was at the drugstore at the corner of Proudfoot Avenue and Main Street. Here, Captain Cook insisted on looking over the window display, which consisted of several open packages of shiny white boric crystals. These he evidently mistook for polar snow, for he began to peck at the window vigorously. Suddenly, a car wheeled to the nearby curb with a shriek of its brakes, and two young men sprang out, one of them bearing a camera. This must be it, said the first young man to the other. Oh, it's them all right, said the second young man. The cameraman set up his tripod on the sidewalk. By this time, a small crowd had gathered around, and two men in white coats had even come out of the drugstore to watch. Captain Cook, however, was still too much interested in the window exhibits to bother to turn around. You're Mr. Popper of 432 Proudfoot Avenue, aren't you? Asked the second young man, pulling a notebook out of his pocket. Yes, said Mr. Popper, realizing that his picture was about to be taken for the newspaper. The two young men had, as a matter of fact, heard about the strange bird from the policeman and had been on their way to the Popper house to get an interview when they saw Captain Cook. Hey, Pelican, turn around and, see the pretty birdie, said the photographer. That's no pelican, said the other, who was a reporter. Pelicans have a pouch in their bills. I'd think it was a dodo, only dodos are extinct. This will make an elegant picture. If I can ever get her to turn around. It's a penguin, said Mr. Popper proudly. Its name is Captain Cook. Gook, said the penguin, turning around, now that they were talking about him. Spying the camera tripod, he walked over and examined it. Probably thinks it's a three-legged stork, said the photographer. This, bird of yours, said the reporter, is it a he or a she? The public will want to know. Mr. Popper hesitated. Well, I call it Captain Cook. That makes it a he, said the reporter, writing rapidly in his notebook. Does it, though? I think women could be captains, too. Still curious, Captain Cook started walking round and round the tripod till the clothesline, the penguin, Mr. Popper, and the tripod were all tangled up. At the advice of one of the bystanders, the tangle was finally straightened out by Mr. Popper's walking around the tripod 3 times in the opposite direction. If you have a dog, you may have gotten into this situation before. At last, Captain Cook, standing still beside Mr. Popper, consented to pose. Mr. Popper straightened his tie, and the cameraman snapped the picture. Captain Cook shut his eyes, and this was the way his picture appeared later in the newspapers. They couldn't take multiple. They had to get one where his eyes were closed. Come on, amateurs. One last question, said the reporter. Where did you get your strange pet? So let's get something straight. That's his last question. Where'd you get it? That's not the leading question? I mean, let's try again, Mr. Reporter. All right. From Admiral Drake, the South Pole explorer. He sent him to me for a present. Yeah, said the reporter. Huh, anyway, it's a good story. Is it though? They've asked him like 2 questions. How'd you get it? Boy or girl? He doesn't really know. I feel like there could have been more to that interview. That's just me. The 2 young men jumped into their car. Mr. Popper and Captain Cook continued on their walk, with quite a crowd following and asking questions. Oh, good. Some other people are on the ball and asking some more questions. The crowd was getting so thick that in order to escape, Mr. Popper led Captain Cook into a barber shop. The man who kept the barber shop had, up until this time, been a very good friend of Mr. Popper's. And that's the end of the chapter. Up until this time, does that mean something's going to happen which will make him not friends with Mr. Popper? Well, we'll find out more about that in the next chapter. Thanks for tuning in. And if you were a reporter, what would you ask Mr. Popper if you saw him on the street with a penguin? Hopefully, one of your first questions would be, where'd you get it? All right. Have a good day, everybody.